What to do with the refugee question.
We have to ensure that Canada is secure in order to be able to help more and more refugees. And even if you took 25,000 refugees in a matter of 6 weeks now, which is extremely dangerous, but even if you did that, what will happen tomorrow? There is more refugees because you didn't deal with the source of the problem.
On the feature today, we speak with an Egyptian pastor, himself a refugee, about how to handle the Syrian crisis. In the news, some setbacks in the discussion over euthanasia. The Trudeau government setting abortion access as one of its top healthcare priorities. And an update on some of the details surrounding Bill 10 in Alberta.
And now, Lighthouse News. Lighthouse News is a presentation of ARPA, the Association for Reform Political Action. Here's your host, Al Sebring.
Some concerning news on two fronts this week in the ongoing government response to the Carter decision on euthanasia. In Ottawa, the federal government has basically said it's not interested in any specific recommendations from a special panel appointed by the previous government to look at the Carter ruling. The panel has been taking submissions from a lot of groups, specifically those who had intervened in the Carter case, and it had been mandated to try to craft some kind of legislative recommendations that took those intervener positions into account. But now, the new government says the panel should simply report what it heard to Parliament without actually making any recommendations. ARPA lawyer Andre Schutten had made a submission to that panel. He says this is a big disappointment.
What this panel has done and is doing is it's taking the time to do the kind of stakeholder consultations that Parliament hasn't been able to do due to a very strict timeline set by the Supreme Court of Canada, as well as the interruption of Parliament by the election. So what Parliament is going to do is probably rush through a legislative response on something as fundamental as the right to life and assisted suicide, and do it in the amount of time that this panel, which is expert and has been focused on for the last number of months, full time, is going to be just one more voice at the table. Either way, the decision has to be with Parliament. My concern is how much weight is this expert panel going to actually be given, or are they going to be just disregarded?
There's another problem, too. The Ontario government appointed a panel purportedly on behalf of all the provinces to look at regulating euthanasia on the premise that it'll be legalized. That Ontario panel is stacked with known euthanasia activists like Dr. Jocelyn Downey. In BC, the legislature's Standing Committee on Health recently came up with a report on this issue as well. ARPA's executive director, Mark Penninga, put in a written submission to that committee, but he says the group's report only seemed to take certain input into account.
The committee acknowledges that it met with two groups during these consultations, Dying with Dignity Canada and the BC Civil Liberties Association. First of all, why are they following the beck and call of the BC Civil Liberties Association, which is the group that took this matter all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada and that's working so hard to legalize euthanasia? And second of all, the provincial government should realize that it's up to the federal government to first take action, and the federal government has already indicated that they plan on asking for an extension. So instead of the provinces rushing to come up with their own regulations, maybe they should first wait and see what the federal government comes up with.
ARPA put a lot of work into the legal research on this file this summer, and while he's disappointed, Schutten says all that work is not wasted.
We don't think it was a waste of time for two reasons. One, the amount of research that we did over the summer has empowered us with a phenomenal legal resource that we can take to Parliament, both of the senators and the members of Parliament, when we discuss with them the constitutionality of both an absolute prohibition and a very, very restrictive response to the Supreme Court's decision. So I think it's one big weapon in our back pocket that we can use for that reason. The other reason it wasn't a waste of time is because our comments were made to this panel. This panel is still going to bring something to Parliament, and their recommendations will probably be made publicly available. So if that's the case, then again, our message is getting out there far and wide. We've proven ourselves to be not some radical, irrational voice, but rather a reasoned voice for prudent public policy.
No word yet on when parliamentarians will actually take on this issue. The House is set to resume December 3rd. One of the things they will be looking at when business resumes is the question of abortion access. In the context of the ongoing debate over abortion clinics in PEI, the new federal health minister, Jane Philpott, told reporters last week that the government wants to examine ways to better equalize access to abortions for all Canadian women. Mike Schutten with We Need a Law.
It's not altogether surprising based on where Justin Trudeau has been at in regards to as no choice but pro-choice policy. But yeah, it was only a few weeks ago where we were excited kind of almost, about the fact that this health minister is the first ever physician to carry this portfolio. She's a faithful member in her Mennonite church, etc. It's almost mind-boggling how, in the face of so many problems facing our healthcare system with an aging demographic, etc., that the first thing that they talk about is how we can make it easier to kill preborn children.
As to the basic discussion about access to abortion, Schutten says that question needs to be put into a broader context.
I think we need to do a bit of research as to how far Canadians need to travel for other things. For example, I have family members who I know have had to travel upwards of 100 kilometers just to get something as simple as an MRI. And I think that's acceptable. We can't have access to every piece of healthcare anywhere in Canada, and it's just simply unrealistic to expect that. Along with the fact that abortion is not medically necessary, there are far better options in how to deal with an unwanted pregnancy than killing the preborn child.
He insists this is not about forcing women to travel long distances for abortion services, but rather about providing a realistic balance within the system. And in Alberta, a bit of a surprise last week at a convention of public and Catholic school trustees. The Alberta School Boards Association convention decided not to have a floor discussion about a policy to protect minority rights, particularly the rights of the LGBTQ community in their schools. The province had ordered each school district to put a policy like that in place by early next year. John Jagersma is with the Association of Independent Schools and Colleges in Alberta. He says we shouldn't read this as some kind of looming defiance of Alberta's Bill 10.
I wouldn't read that much into this. I think there's a lot of politics at play in each individual school board, and a lot of them value their local autonomy, their responsibility for their division, and they want to keep control over the policy writing in that area, and they didn't want to have the discussion in front of the provincial media.
Jagersma says he fully expects the education sector in Alberta will be on board with new policies by the end of March, although we should expect different policies from different sectors.
I would suspect for sure that Catholic schools would have a different looking policy than a public school might. I would be confident some independent schools are going to have a different looking policy than both of them, but that public school boards won't meet the requirement would surprise me.
Back with more after this.
On our recent Life tour, we gave each guest a package of 5 postcards to mail to their MP. Have you mailed yours yet? If not, we want to remind you to send a different card every few weeks to your Member of Parliament. If you weren't able to attend or need more postcards, please email us at info@weneedalaw.ca with your mailing address and the number of packages requested. And remember, postage to Parliament is always free.
And we're back on the program. On the feature today, I'm joined on the line from Toronto by Reverend Majed Al-Shafi. Reverend Al-Shafi is a former refugee, originally from Egypt. He had to flee the region because of religious persecution. Today, he's living in Canada and running an organization called One Free World International. We link to their website from the Lighthouse News homepage this week. Reverend Al-Shafi, welcome to the program. I'd like to start with a simple question, really. As somebody with a lot of background in that region, what was your first reaction when you heard about what happened in Paris earlier this month?
There was no surprises. We have to understand that this is not the first terror attack on Paris, and I can assure you it will not be the last terror attack in Europe. So this was not a surprise. What really was surprise to us is the capacity, how big is the attack, and how come the French intelligence and the European intelligence completely missed it. It's an attack that took a lot of preparation. It's an attack that brought a lot of weapons and explosions inside the borders in Paris and the French territory. For this to happen undetected by the French intelligence, that was really a big surprise to us.
This is happening in a context where there's increasing pressure on Western countries, including us here in Canada, to take more refugees from the area. There's a lot of discussion about this. Justin Trudeau remains committed to take, 25,000 by the end of the year. Others are saying we can't do this without adequate security screening to ensure that the refugees don't include a terrorist element. What's your take on that?
First of all, I respect Mr. Trudeau for trying to fulfill a promise that he gave during the campaign. But Mr. Trudeau have to remember that he also gave a bigger promise to the Canadians to keep our borders and our people safe and secure. Now, you have to understand and you have to remember that I used to be a refugee myself. So I am not anti-refugees. I have nothing against refugees. I used to be one of them. I eat like them, I drink like them, I bleed like them. But here is the 3 points that we have to understand when it comes to the refugees. Number one, it has to happen in a balance between bringing them here and saving their lives and security. Without proper security, we will not be able to help more. Let me put it by this way. Did you ever been on a plane where the flight attendant came and said, if the oxygen mask fell, you have to put it in yourself first before you put it in your child? One time I asked the flight attendant, I told her, that's very selfish. Of course I will put it on my child first before myself. She said, no, sir, if you cannot help yourself, you will not be able to help anybody else. And this is exactly what we're dealing with right now. We have to ensure that Canada is secure in order to be able to help more and more refugees. This is number 1 point. Number 2, even if you took 25,000 refugees in a matter of 6 weeks now, which is extremely dangerous, is extremely naive, but even if you did that and you took 25,000 refugees, what will happen tomorrow? There is more refugees because you didn't deal with the source of the problem. So Mr. Trudeau want to take 25,000 refugees, but at the same time he wants to pull away from fighting ISIS, which is the source of generating all of these refugees. Number 3 and the last point, we have to ask the question, why Saudi Arabia is not taking refugees? Why Kuwait is not taking refugees? Why Qatar? Why not Egypt? Why not Morocco, Tunis, Algeria? Why the Arab Muslim countries not taking more refugees? Knowing that they are sharing together the same language, the same culture, the same religion, the same tradition. So there is something here that has to be why the Arab countries is not taking more refugees. That they know something that we don't know, that they are scared of something that we should be scared of. All what I'm saying, the movement of the refugees has to happen in a balance with the security.
I saw something online this morning, and I'm just going to quote it. It's from the folks at the Aquila Report. They say when Christians flee as refugees, they can't go into the UN-run camps there because they face the same persecution from which they're trying to flee. And if they're not in the refugee camps, they're not included in the application process as refugees for asylum. The point here being that some of the refugees are sort of self-selecting in the process in Syria, and there's an inherent imbalance that says that the Christians and the Jews and the Yazidis who are being persecuted over there don't even get into the refugee stream because of what's going on the ground there. Would you comment on that?
Well, with my own respect for the people who's listening to us right now, please allow me not to be politically correct about what I will be saying, because you know what, I'm sick and tired of being politically correct, to be honest with you. Let me just speak the truth. Number 1, the UN is standing always for united nothing. That's what the UN is standing for, with my own respect. I'm sure that they are doing great work in different areas, but at the end of the day, we hear a lot about these reports, and we receive a lot of complaints about how the Christians and the Yazidis and the minorities is being treated differently in the UN camps. And all of these reports that we're receiving, cannot all of them be a lie. Cannot be all of them just be a paranoia. Now, we don't know exactly to what extent, simply because the refugees is scared even to report it. But what we know, that the people that working on the ground, they are basically, some of them from different backgrounds. And sometimes even the discrimination, the persecution can happen on the refugee camps because the supervision and the accountability is not exist in some of these camps. So the bottom line here is that we have to look at the most vulnerable. We cannot count completely and fully in the UN. We have to count on our own resources. We have to count on our own embassies. We have to count on our own NGOs on the ground that helping the locals.
So what's the Christian balance here between compassion and protecting our culture, some would say our very civilization?
As I said, we have to accept the refugees, that most vulnerable, refugees that are unable to protect themselves, refugees that don't have militias protecting them, refugees that don't have any hidden background. We have to accept the most vulnerable refugees. Doesn't matter what's the religion. I don't care if they're Christians. I don't care if they're Yazidis. I don't care if they're Muslims. I don't care. They have to be the most vulnerable refugees. And we have to do it in a balance with the security that we know that we give enough time to our security system to monitor them, know who they are, look at their backgrounds, and to know that they are not coming with hidden agendas where they can put our very civilization and our very society in jeopardy or in danger.
Reverend El Shafi, thank you very much. We're out of time.
Thank you so much. Take care.
This has been Lighthouse News, delivering news and commentaries on today's current events to equip Christians for their task in the public square. Questions or feedback? You can leave us an audio comment by clicking on the answering machine button at the top of the Lighthouse News homepage, or you can send us an email, info@arpacanada.ca. Be sure to join us again next week for another edition of Lighthouse News.